The first time I saw Ryan, I was bleeding, broken, and barely holding on to life. I never thought death would feel so quiet. I always imagined it would come with screams, sirens, and flashes of white light. But that night, as I lay trapped in the wreckage of my car, I felt nothing but an eerie silence. My head was throbbing, my vision blurred, and the weight of twisted metal pinned me in place. Then I heard his voice. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." I forced my eyes open, and there he was, his strong hands working fast to free me, his deep brown eyes locked onto mine, keeping me from slipping away. He wasn't just a paramedic. In that moment, he was my lifeline. The way he looked at me, the way he spoke, it was like I was the only person in the world. Moments later, I blacked out. When I woke up in the hospital, pain shot through my body like fire. The accident had left me with a fractured rib, a concussion, and bruises that would take weeks to fade. But the strangest part was a feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with my injuries. I couldn't stop thinking about him. Ryan, the man who had pulled me from the wreckage, the man who had held my hand as I faded in and out of consciousness, the man who made me feel safe in my most vulnerable moment. I knew it was ridiculous. I was a married woman. My husband, Victor, sat by my hospital bed, his face etched with worry. He blamed himself for the accident, for the fight that had driven me out into the night. "Mabel, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his hands gripping mine. I should have felt something. Relief, comfort, love. Instead, all I could think about was the way Ryan had looked at me, the way his voice had steadied me when I was teetering on the edge of life and death. Victor stayed by my side for hours, but it felt like a stranger sitting next to me. Something had shifted that night, something irreversible. Days passed, and I convinced myself that my thoughts about Ryan were nothing more than misplaced gratitude. But when he walked into my hospital room for a routine checkup, I felt my breath hitch. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Better," I lied, my heart racing. His presence filled the room, his scent, clean and fresh, somehow grounding me. He wasn't like Victor. Victor was composed, calculated, always carrying the weight of responsibility. Ryan was different. He had a warmth about him, an energy that made me feel alive. I shouldn't have wanted him, but I did. A week later, I was discharged. Victor drove me home, filling the silence with empty words about how he would do better, how we would fix things. I nodded, pretending to listen. But my mind was somewhere else. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, I reached for my phone. My fingers hesitated before typing the message. "Ryan, thank you for everything." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew this was a step I shouldn't take, but before I could stop myself, I hit send. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a reply. "Anytime, Mabel. Take care of yourself." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone to my chest. I told myself it was innocent, just a message, just gratitude. But deep down, I knew better. This was only the beginning. Life returned to normal, or at least, that's what I told myself. Victor was trying harder, treating me with the kind of patience and care I used to long for. But the accident had created a rift I couldn't bridge. It wasn't the fight that nearly cost me my life that haunted me. It was the way my heart raced every time I thought about Ryan. I told myself I wouldn't text him again. I failed. We started off with casual exchanges. I'd ask about his work, he'd ask about my recovery. Then, one evening, he sent a message that made my stomach twist. I keep thinking about you, Mabel. I stared at the screen, heat rising to my cheeks. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I should have shut it down. I should have reminded him and myself that I was a married woman. But instead, I typed back. I think about you too. That message changed everything. We met for coffee under the guise of gratitude. I told myself it was just to say thank you, to finally close the door on whatever this was. But when I saw him walk through the cafe doors, every ounce of resolve melted away. We sat across from each other, the tension between us thick, unspoken. I shouldn't be here, I whispered. Ryan leaned in slightly. Neither should I. But neither of us moved. The more we talked, the more I realized how easy it was to be with him. He listened. He understood. He made me feel like a version of myself I thought I had lost. Victor and I had been together for years. And somewhere along the way, I had become a shadow of the woman I used to be. With Ryan, I felt seen again, desired. Then it happened. An accidental touch, his fingers brushing against mine as I reached for my coffee. A lingering moment where neither of us pulled away. My breath caught in my throat. Mabel? His voice was low, hesitant, filled with something I recognized all too well. I should have stood up. I should have left. Instead, I let my fingers curl around his. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again. The warmth of his hand, the way he looked at me, the guilt pressing down on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I had crossed a line, maybe not physically, not yet, but in my heart, I knew. I was already his. The stolen moments, the lingering glances, the electric touches, none of it compared to the night I finally gave in. It started with a simple invitation. Come over. I hesitated, staring at the message. I knew what it meant. I knew the point of no return had arrived. My hands shook as I typed my reply. I'll be there. When I walked into his apartment, the air was thick with tension. I barely had time to think before his lips were on mine, igniting a fire I had spent weeks trying to smother. I had never wanted anything more in my life. That night, I let go of everything, my guilt, my vows, my past, and I became his. The aftermath of that night was a storm I couldn't escape. Guilt wrapped itself around me like a noose, tightening with every glance Victor gave me. He sensed something had changed. I saw it in the way he watched me, in the way his hands lingered on mine, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. Ryan and I continued our affair in stolen moments. Each meeting left me breathless, yet hollow. I was living two lives, and neither felt complete. Then, the inevitable happened. Victor found out. A late-night call, a misplaced text. Something tipped him off. When he confronted me, his eyes were filled with a pain I had never seen before. I tried to deny it, to salvage what was left, but the truth was written all over my face. Why, Mabel? His voice cracked, the weight of betrayal crushing him. I had no answer, no excuse. Ryan was my escape, but at what cost? My marriage lay in ruins, my heart torn between love and lust, and for the first time I wondered, had I mistaken passion for something real?